Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the C3 Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by CarolinaCatChronicles.com. It's the podcast directly for the biggest, baddest fantasy football challenge around. 48 teams walk in. One team walks out a winner with the Shaq Thompson jersey, $300. Everybody else is a winner because they're a Panthers fan. And the Panthers happen to be 5-0. So even if you're like my team, who is 0-5 in fantasy, you're still a winner. We had a winner this week of the Panther Snuggie. Jay Holloman won that for the most Panther fantasy football points. He had Olsen. He had the Panthers defense and one other player, which I cannot remember off the top of my head, but he basically crushed it. So he will be warming up in a Panther Snuggie. I'm here with two writers from CarolinaCatChronicles.com. Big Play J-Ray, what is up, my man?
What's going on? I'm ready to talk fantasy football, and guess who's 6-0? This guy.
Oh, another one. Powerhouse. That's another team out of the 48 that I know of. I know the Rochester Rusty Nails are also 6-0 in the Mills League. And we've got Big Splash Grant Hughes. What's up, my man?
Hey, nothing much. I might not be 6-0, but I'm close at 5-1.
Oh, wow. So C3 is the writers are just racking up the wins.
Hey, we're not all talk, man.
Neither are the Panthers. All right, let's jump into it, guys. Can you give me a little recap of where your leagues stand at right now?
Go ahead, Grant.
All right. At the top of the East, I've got myself. Close behind is the current champion and the not-so-lazy Susans at 4-2. At the top of the West Division is Pimpin' A. Ely at 4-2. And Luke Clark at 4-2 also.
All right, nice. And how about the West?
No. Well, I did East and West.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. I got you. Those are the leaders for each side. I got you.
Sure.
In the Mills League, we've got the Rochester Rusty Nails at 6-0 for the East. Cam Burglar and Fries 4-2. And then there's a big drop-off to Mel's Gurley, man, 2-4. On the West side, Normandy Invasion is sitting at 5-1. Team Keep Pounding 4-2. And everybody else after that is 500 and below. And then I think the other league that we got to deal with before we get to J-Rays is, and I can read them off if you need it too, Caddyshack, wait, that's your league, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
You're Rucker. All right, so the other league is Muhammad. That's what it is, and that is Ken's league. Standings are Johnny Manziel's drinking buddy at 5-1. Team Fabulosa at 3-2. Then in the West side, you get Cam's Abdullah Oblongata at 5-1. And probably the worst name in all of fantasy football history, Aaron Hernandez Pistol Offense.
Wow.
4-2. That's a tough name. How's your league shaping up?
My league's actually doing pretty well. In the East standings, that's where my team is, the Caddyshack. You know, great name, great movie. I thought I had the best name until I heard Normandy Invasion. That's a pretty sweet name.
Right.
After at 6-0, we got Uptown Funches. Gonna give it to you. 4-2. Injury bug strikes again. 3-3. After that, everybody's below 500. And then in the West side, we got somebody who's ranked higher than me because they have more points. I guess that's important. So we have someone that's 6-0, and their team's called Keep Pounding, and then Team Supercam 5-1, and the winners at 4-2.
Holy moly. How are all these teams, how are there so many 6-0 teams? Where's the parity, guys? How have you been able to get to 6-0, J-Ray?
Me? Man, I don't know how, to be honest with you. My team has been filled with injuries, and I've had some suspensions. I had Andre Ellington. He went out with an injury, and I was luckily pick up East Carolina Chris Johnson, and he took over.
Right.
So that was a
Right.
good pickup. And then McCoy went out for me. Luckily, I have played some people who have not scored that many points. So I don't know when the last time was I got over 100 points, but
Holy moly, you're 6-0 and you don't even score 100 points. That's amazing.
yeah,
And
I know.
80% of your points are from Rob Gronkowski.
Yep, the Patriots, man. I hate to say it, without the Patriots, I would not be 6-0 right now. Just saying.
Grant, tell us your secret to the success. You said fortune was a good part of it as well.
Well, so far it's been probably mid-season acquisitions. Antonio Gates powered me to a win the week before last, and Dion Lewis has been doing pretty good for me as well. Starting to run with 2 tight end sets with Greg Olson and Gates. That's got me pretty good over the past few weeks. And then just getting lucky. I haven't scored over 100 points that often, and my point score definitely isn't the highest league, but I'm ranked number 1. So
That's awesome. That's good fortune. Obviously, I haven't had it in my league. 0-6. Last night had a chance to win going in down 8 points, and I had Dwayne Harris. Thought I was going to eke it out. The very first time, guys, I sat I sat Phillip Rivers for Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton goes out and throws 3 touchdowns, has a good game. But somehow Phillip Rivers throws like 2 touchdowns or 1 not even a lot, but he just threw like a bazillion yards, 504 yards, I believe. So I left 10 points sitting on the bench. Guys, we're about midway through we're getting close to the midway point. We're a little over a third. Well, we're 6 games in. Where are you guys seeing the league go in this place? Are you seeing teams pull away at this point, or is there going to be some teams that are going to be able to dark horse it out of the back end?
That's a tough question. I don't know if my luck's going to run out because I'm not scoring over 100 points, but I'm looking at the other division on the west side, and there's about 3 or 4 more teams on that side that have scored more points than I've been able to. Somehow I've scored more points than everyone else in my division, but the winners has like 841 points, which is more than anyone else in our league, and he's sitting at 4-2. So I mean, it could go either way. Like I said, a whole bunch of injuries. You never know what's going to happen. I just had Jeremy Maclin go out with a concussion, so I got to figure out what to do to fill that void now. So you never know.
Grant, do you think at this point that the fantasy league is starting to solidify itself? In the league I've played with buddies for like a decade. Last year, a guy came back from 0-6 and made the playoffs.
Wow.
Was a crazy run. But do you feel that things are starting to shake out at this point, or is there opportunity to capitalize on some good fortune and maybe some good pickups?
Well, it's been pretty even so far, but I am looking for the 3rd team in the West, all hail nipple shorts with Brian Palmies. He's got an Arian Foster coming back. That was a late round pick for him. And I think he can make a serious contention for the championship in our league. And then you got the last team in the West, Aussie Superfly, and he's been banged up all season, but he should get Des Bryant back here soon. And so, other than that, it's been pretty even, but I'm still looking for those 2 teams to show up here over the stretch.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about some fantasy football in general. Marshawn Lynch comes back. That's a notable running back. He looked to perform pretty well against the Panthers. He looked healthy at least. Terrible offensive line. To me, it seems like this is really the running back position for fantasy football like entirely dictated by the offensive line. The reason I'm 0-6 is C.J. Anderson and Calvin Johnson, my top 2 picks, have gotten me essentially 0 points. C.J. Anderson hasn't started for me since like week 3. What do you do? Where's the running back situation going? You've got Ellington coming back. You got question marks in Philadelphia. Is this question marks in New York? What are you guys thinking if you're a fantasy football owner at this point in the season when it comes to running backs?
I think the running back position is becoming even more rare, like to find a quality back in fantasy football, just because a lot of teams are using like 3 running backs now. I mean, you got the starter, you got someone that'll come in and take over, and then you got a scat back, one that will come in and take all the catches from them. So, I mean, it's pretty tough. If you don't have that one running back that's going to be involved in every play like Charles, but, now he's out, it's going to be difficult going forward. You're going to have to be smart and figure out, the matchups.
Let me ask you about Eddie Lacy. Saw a trade offer. Someone capitalized in the league on a trade that was open for a while. Somebody had offered Jimmy Graham for Eddie Lacy a couple of weeks ago and left the trade out there. And our boy across the pond, Jay Cryer, took advantage of this. So what's going on? James Starks seemed to he had a big game, but he only had 10 carries in Green Bay. If you are a fantasy owner, what do you do with Eddie Lacy, Grant?
If I'm an owner, I just sit on him. He's too good of a back. He should overcome here soon, especially with a passing offense around him. But if I'm an opponent, I try to buy low on him, shoot the guy who does have him, a smaller trade and see if you can pick him up and carry him over the stretch, because I think he will break out eventually.
How low of a trade are you going? Are you talking like a Ryan Matthews for him? Are you talking Woodhead for? That's the guy from San Diego, right?
Yeah.
Are you talking up a tier like maybe Ingram?
I'd probably if I went low tier, it might be a 2-for-1, maybe someone like Danny Woodhead and maybe a mid-tier receiver, or I'd go just second tier, probably like Mark Ingram, or maybe someone like Brandon Cooks, who has been doing better over recent weeks, and try to just get straight up.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the quarterback position. Quarterbacks scored big this week. We got Matthew Stafford with 33.9 fantasy points. This is just according to NFL.com's fantasy stats. Phillip Rivers, 28. I don't know how that's possible. It had to be more. Luck was next, and then you get Freeman, Hopkins. We see Bryant. Let's see the next quarterback. Ryan Fitzpatrick, Brian Hoyer, Blake Bortles, Colin Kaepernick. Is it silly this day and age to go after, with the rarity of running backs, the need for high-scoring tight ends at time? Should you just avoid drafting a top-tier quarterback and just try to eke out guys on the waiver wire or some backups or some just second-tier fellas? And, Jay, I'll let you start with that.
Absolutely. I think you should stick to the running backs and the wide receivers and the tight ends and look at the quarterbacks last, because I've somehow been winning with Sam Bradford and Marcus Mariota as my quarterback. And, that's pretty difficult. Yeah, and I'll probably drop Bradford this week, considering, he just threw 2 picks, and he's playing the Panthers, so he'll probably throw 3 picks. One of those is probably to Norman. So, yeah, definitely go with the running backs now that they're even more rare with what's going on. And, that whole thing with Antonio Brown, he hasn't showed up this season ever since Roethlisberger's gone down. So there's not too many, top-tier players out there. If you go to the quarterback in the first round, Rodgers is a good pick, but, other than that, you got to be careful.
And he's not putting up just explosive. He wasn't in the top 10 this week, and I don't even know if he was in the top 30 of scoring. Yeah, he was. He's 22nd, ranked 22nd this week. Another player, and maybe we need to go back to this, talking teams that, were so easy in fantasy football to be flavor of the week, wherever the wind's blowing. If you think about it, Blake Bortles right now is performing pretty well as a fantasy quarterback. There's a lot of value in the passing game in Jacksonville, but are we overlooking Miami at this point because of their rocky start? Lamar Miller comes out, has a solid day, and Now I'm getting it confused because there's another dude named Landry that's a quarterback now for Pittsburgh, but uh, Jarvis Landry is he Pittsburgh or is he Miami?
Miami.
Okay, so tell me, is this something? Is there opportunity in Miami? If you're a fantasy owner, is this maybe somebody that you try to buy low on Grant as well, Lamar Miller, or is that just a one-time after you fired your coach flare up?
I'd have to wait it out a few weeks. I wouldn't go ahead and bust down the door on a trade right now. But yeah, it's just there are some good options in it. Miami, like their defense was one of the top scoring defense last week. Jarvis Landry had a breakout game, and then someone like Jordan Cameron can come in and get a few targets as well in the passing game.
All right. What do you guys think in the top stories are right now, or what's on your mind as a fantasy football player, analyst, writer, all these things? What are you zeroing in at this point in the season, Justin?
There's a lot of things. It mainly depends. Like one of my wide receivers just had a concussion. That was Macklin, so I'm looking to pick up a wide receiver this week. I'd hate to, say names, to give someone an advantage over me, but I'll be nice anyways. Brandon LaFell's coming back for the Patriots. I don't know what kind of role he'll play for them, but last year he had a pretty good year. Yes, he was on the Panthers and it didn't work well, but Tom Brady seems to like him. As far as stories, you're looking at DeMarco Murray. Second week in a row, he seems to be trending upward. So if you have him on your team, don't drop him. I don't know if you necessarily should start him yet, especially since he's going to be playing the Panthers. But, just leave him on your bench till, the Eagles could figure it out. And that whole thing with Antonio Brown and, not being worth anything with Ben Roethlisberger isn't behind center. So.
Right. Now they're talking about, but now they're going to be starting the Landry guy or whatever his name is, the guy that stepped in for Vic. They're going to start him over Michael Vick, and it seemed like that offense got some gas in the tank. One of the things I did is, or found a second life, should I say, I stashed Martavius Bryant away on my roster in the draft. I drafted him with knowing he was going to be 4 games out, expecting him to come in fresh, expecting that offense to be as high-powered as we know it could be had Roethlisberger stayed healthy. And he comes in and puts up a monster game. I had buys. I had injuries. I had to plug and play him this week. And he blew it up. That team right there is that if they can make it through this part, and it looks like Big Ben's coming back in a couple of weeks, if not next week, not this week, but maybe the following week, those guys are going to get the points that they need then. So Antonio Brown, sure, disappointing through the first 6, but you might get him if you can hang in there. He might be the guy that carries your team late in the season. What about Victor Cruz? Victor Cruz no longer feels pain in his calf. Does it matter? Will he? First, I think he's made of glass. I don't see how he plays at all. And after watching the Giants last night, I hate them. They're dead to me. What do you think, Grant, about Victor Cruz? Do you think is he available in some leagues, or is he a guy that's been like where you just stash him on your bench and hope one day he's good?
I think someone has him stashed on the bench in our league, but I'm not sure if he can overcome all the players in his way coming off an injury. You've got Ruben Randall and others in front of him, and Odell Beckham. But I don't think he's worth starting or even a roster spot at this point.
All right. What do you think, in Grant, kind of top story? What's on your radar? Top stories right now as a fantasy owner, analyst, and writer.
The top storyline I thought has been the running backs who emerged late last season and how their production has decreased since then. The top 3 were probably Jeremy Hill and C.J. Anderson and even Jonathan Stewart. over those last 8 games last season. And only Jonathan Stewart with that 2-touchdown game against the Seahawks, and then Jeremy Hill with the 3 touchdowns. Those are really the only good games those 3 backs have had since, when they broke out last season.
Do you see Do you see Jonathan Stewart bouncing back after just finally getting in the end zone for the first time, and then the second time in that game against Seattle? Is that what it takes to get over, or are you still going to find him to be disappointing?
Please say yes. It's on my bench.
I think he'll bounce back. I think we need to call more runs up the middle because Orr and Remmers are too busy in pass protection. But I also saw a stat from Pro Football Focus that said Stewart was second in the league in missed tackles. So it's not like he has been an ineffective back, but just not an effective one for fantasy so far.
Right. Speaking of, Cam Newton could be trending upwards as well as a fantasy football quarterback. He seemed to find the end zone a little bit more over the last 3 weeks. Are you guys ready to say Cam Newton can be a fantasy football player again of starting caliber, or is he going to be a second-tier guy like he's been for so long?
I think right now he's still second tier just because of who he's throwing the ball to. He can run with his feet, and he can dive in the end zone and make some amazing plays. But I wouldn't use him other than a bye week right now, just because you most likely have a more consistent quarterback on your team already.
For people out there struggling to find a tight end, right, that is making a difference, is there a way around this at this point in the season? If there's not a guy out there on the waiver wire right away, if we can't trade for him, how do we find a solution to this? Because you found Antonio Gates. Tell us, what does it take to replicate? What was the strategy behind that Antonio Gates pickup? Was it just pure desperation? Was there strategy to it? And how do you replicate that maybe somewhere else, Grant?
Well, my original plan was to get 2 starter-worthy players. So I traded away Doug Martin and Kendall Wright for Larry Fitzgerald because I really needed a receiver, and I can't start Doug Martin. I just hate him too much. And so I decided to pick up Antonio Gates because it's a half-point per reception league, and I thought he'd do pretty good. He's done pretty good thus far. But tight ends are almost as thin as running backs, if not thinner. I mean, Denver's looking for one, even though they have Owen Daniels, so I'd watch who they pick up because they said their offense can't run without one.
Justin, do you just look for a guy that wears an arm brace at this point?
Well, first I want to point out that I drafted Gronkowski and Gates, but I was in a bad situation where I needed a running back because my dude got injured. So I actually ended up having to drop Antonio Gates and stuck with Gronk. So I kind of regret doing that, but I'm 6-0, so I can't really, get too mad at myself. As far as finding a tight end, if you don't have one already, you are screwed. That's all I can say.
Is Zach Ertz maybe the guy? Is he saw 86% of the snaps this week. He was second on the team with targets with 7. My theory is that you find a decent tight end on a terrible team with a bad quarterback, and that can get you some catches there. We got to find a solution to this because you're right. You didn't draft the right guy at this point, and the right guy is that dude out of Cincinnati. What's his name again? Eifert.
Yep.
That's the guy. You probably would have gotten him in like the 3rd or 4th round and just been crushing it. But do you maybe make a deal for – does anybody know what Austin Sinafarian Jenkins' health status is, or is he still nicked up?
He says he's still questionable. But he did have a lot of promise coming into the season. I think the first game he dropped like 29 points or something.
Yeah.
I grabbed up the veteran tight end Ben Watson on the New Orleans Saints particularly when they went to McCown and I was playing out my theory of bad quarterback, bad team. It didn't work out the first week. I happened to leave him in by accident. They played on Thursday night, and he blew it up. The good news on my team is I got Greg Olsen, so either way I would have been straight this week. Is there maybe a guy? Does anybody know a guy, or are we just screwed, Grant?
Well, Julius Thomas is on the waivers in our league, and I'd probably pick him up if I didn't have everyone on a bye week.
Wow.
He had a big week.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking at my tight ends. We actually have some decent people available. We got Charles Clay. I'm still waiting for Eric Ebron to break out, but he's available. And you got Vernon Davis, but he hasn't showed up since 3 years ago. And Benjamin Watson, he's been doing well with Drew Brees. So there are a few people that possibly people in my league could pick up.
This is according to Bucks Nation. Austin Cinefarian Jenkins told Rick Stroud he was close to returning and that he feels pretty good. That doesn't sound good. All right. Okay, well, this is about we got 2 minutes left on the show. Tell us one fantasy sleeper who's trending. Tell us one guy that's trending down and a fantasy sleeper or a guy trending up that you are interested in watching from a fantasy football perspective, Grant.
A guy who continues to trend down for me is C.J. Anderson. I mean, most people drafted him in the first round, even in the top 10 or top 5, and he just hasn't performed this year, and he's getting beat out by Ronnie Hillman too, somewhat. And then the guy
he's a cut.
Yeah,
he's a cut.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm so mad because I don't ever pick running backs on the damn Denver Broncos. Never, right? Since Peyton came there. And then I went against my theory because I picked 11th, and I picked Calvin Johnson thinking he was going to have a bounce back year after this. And then I had to get a running back or else I wouldn't get one till like pick 78,000. And I picked C.J. Anderson. I went against my code, and it has ruined me. So who's trending up then, or the sleeper?
DeMarco Murray's trending up. I mean,
wow.
He's always been scoring touchdowns this season, but he just hasn't been getting the yardage. He's broke out a few runs these past 2 games, and I'm watching that because he's on my team. But I'll have to say he's getting benched this week. He and Jordan Matthews. Just
to hate. You're just hating on him.
And I like it. Defense is good enough to where it's a smart decision as well, I think.
There you go. All right, Justin, tell us who is trending up or down, and who's your trending up or sleeper guy to keep an eye on.
So my trending down guy has been trending down since last season, and that is Peyton Manning. I actually drafted him in the first round last season, and I regret that. So I feel bad for anyone that has Peyton Manning this season because his offense has been non-existent, and his defense has been winning ball games. And I'm pretty sure the Broncos' defense has more points than he has right now in fantasy football. And
all right.
Trending up is probably Diggs, Stephon Diggs in the Vikings. He showed up the past 2 weeks. He's getting all the targets. I don't know what's going on with Charles Johnson. He was supposed to have a good year this year, depending on how well he did last year. But I'm looking at a wide receiver just because Macklin had a concussion. So you got Diggs, you got Martavius Bryant, you got Marvin Jones that I'm looking at. So, hopefully those guys do well so I can pick one of them up.
My trending down guy is going to be a very simple one, and it is Eli Manning. You stink. Gosh, Eli, you are horrible, and you just remind us each and every week why you play as terrible as you look. I want to see this. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it was funny because the commentators were like, last year he threw an interception every 25 passes or something. And then they were like, he threw an interception this year every 48 passes. And what does he do the next 2 plays? He throws 2 picks. So that was pretty crazy.
I wanted to see. I was hoping. I saw that Devin Smith had. Let me see if I can find it. He did not show up in this last game. The previous 2 weeks, Devin Smith had been back and had 15 targets in 2 games, which is a notable amount. You might be able to find the sleeper might be a guy like Zach Stacy. Chris Ivory has gotten a ton of touches. He's just been crushing it. 20 attempts for 146 yards and a touchdown. It's just, I still regret. I told Joey that's who we should pick. We were drafting somebody's team for him. So maybe Zach Stacy. He did get 13 carries. He had 2 catches. Maybe you can squeeze something out if you need a deep flex if you run into an injury. Keep an eye on Devin Smith late, though. If he starts getting targets, I just don't know if Fitzpatrick can take advantage of his deep speed. But you got Brandon Marshall, who's just been killing it. A lot of attention needs to be focused on Marshall. Might be some some upside there potentially. So I don't know if it's a guy or if it's just a nothing in this past week, but maybe something later. All right, this is the C3 Fantasy Football Podcast. Tell them, Grant, where they can follow you and find your work.
You can follow me on Twitter, Grant Hughes at Kenyon Vander.
All right. And obviously you can go to CarolinaCatChronicles.com and find his work. Justin, Big Play J Ray, tell them how they can find you on Twitter.
So you can follow me at JRay19 on Twitter, and you can find all my wonderful, amazing work on CarolinaCatChronicles.com.
This is the professor. I'm going to give a shout-out to J Ray. Go Pirates. Grant, what I got to say to you about your team. I'll keep it to myself this week since you were such a stud on this show tonight. This is Tony Dunn, a.k.a. the professor from CarolinaCatChronicles.com. Check us out next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. for the C3 Fantasy Football Podcast. And that's it, guys. We're not even going to do music. We're just cutting it off.
All right. Good luck.